My name is Raven Martinez. I'm 25 years old, and I thought being a responsible tenant would ensure the return of my security deposit until my landlord looked me in the eye and said, "Raven left the apartment damaged." What happened next proved that while I was meticulously documenting the pristine condition of my rental unit and following every lease requirement, my landlord was planning to steal my two-time, zero deposit to fund personal renovations she wanted to make, regardless of the apartment's actual condition. Before I tell you how one phone call from a housing inspector changed everything, my landlord thought she knew about tenant law and how city records exposed damages that were actually required maintenance she was legally obligated to provide. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how 3 words, triple damages awarded, silenced my landlord and made her realize she had just violated housing law so severely it would cost her 60 plus legal fees. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. I'm a recent college graduate working my first professional job as a graphic designer at a marketing agency downtown. After living with roommates throughout college, I was excited to finally have my own place and demonstrate my independence as a responsible adult. I found a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in a well-maintained building owned by Margaret Walsh, a woman in her 60s who owned several rental properties in the area. The apartment was exactly what I was looking for: clean, updated, and in a safe neighborhood, with reasonable rent for my entry-level salary. "I run a quality operation," Margaret told me during our initial meeting. "I expect tenants who will take care of my properties and respect the investment I've made in maintaining these units." I appreciated Margaret's emphasis on property maintenance and felt confident that we would have a good landlord-tenant relationship based on mutual respect and clear expectations. The lease agreement included a due zero security deposit, which represented nearly 2 months' rent, and a significant portion of my savings as a new graduate. Margaret explained that the deposit would be returned within 30 days of move-out, minus any deductions for damages beyond normal wear and tear. "I'm very fair about security deposits," Margaret assured me. "If you take care of the apartment, you'll get your full deposit back. I only keep money for actual damages that require repair or replacement." I signed the lease, feeling confident that I would easily get my deposit back, since I had no intention of damaging the apartment and planned to be an exemplary tenant. Before moving in, I conducted a thorough walkthrough with Margaret, documenting the condition of the apartment with photos and written notes. The unit was in excellent condition: freshly painted, clean carpets, functioning appliances, and no visible damage or wear. "Everything looks perfect," I told Margaret as we completed the inspection. "I'll take good care of everything." "I'm sure you will," Margaret replied. "Most of my tenants are responsible people who understand the value of maintaining a nice living space." During my tenancy, I was meticulous about apartment maintenance. I cleaned regularly, reported any maintenance issues immediately, and treated the space as if I owned it myself. I wanted to build a positive rental history and ensure that I would receive excellent references for future housing applications. The only maintenance issues that arose during my year-long lease were minor problems that any rental property would experience: a kitchen faucet that began dripping and needed a new washer, a bathroom exhaust fan that started making noise and required lubrication, a few small nail holes in the walls from hanging pictures, normal carpet wear in high-traffic areas. I reported each issue to Margaret promptly and offered to coordinate repairs, but she preferred to handle all maintenance herself using her regular contractors. "I like to maintain control over the quality of repairs," Margaret explained. "I have trusted vendors who know how I want things done." Throughout the year, Margaret seemed satisfied with my tenancy. She never complained about my behavior, always cashed my rent checks promptly, and responded reasonably to the few maintenance requests I submitted. When my lease expired, I decided to move to a larger apartment closer to my workplace. I gave Margaret the required 30-day notice and began preparing for the move-out process. "I'll schedule the final walkthrough for the day you turn in your keys," Margaret told me. "We'll assess any deductions at that time." I spent the final weeks of my tenancy preparing the apartment for inspection. I cleaned thoroughly, spackling the nail holes from picture hanging, and ensuring everything was in the same condition as when I moved in, accounting for normal wear and tear. The day before move-out, I conducted my own final inspection, taking detailed photos of every room to document the excellent condition I was leaving the apartment in. The walls were clean with only minor scuff marks that would be considered normal wear. The carpets showed slight traffic patterns but were clean and undamaged. The appliances were spotless and functioning perfectly. The bathroom and kitchen were pristine. I felt confident that Margaret would find the apartment in excellent condition and return my full security deposit. Move-out day arrived, and Margaret conducted the final walkthrough with me present. "The apartment looks good overall," Margaret said as we toured each room. "I don't see any major damage." "I've tried to take excellent care of everything," I replied. "I want to make sure I get my full deposit back. I'll assess everything more thoroughly after you leave and send you an itemized list of any deductions within the required time frame," Margaret said. I turned in my keys, feeling optimistic about getting my deposit returned quickly and without deductions. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from Margaret that shattered my expectations. According to her itemized deduction list, she was keeping my entire .20 security deposit for the following damages: $800 for wall damage requiring full repainting, $600 for carpet replacement due to excessive wear, $400 for kitchen and bathroom deep cleaning beyond normal standards, $200 for miscellaneous repairs and maintenance. I stared at the list in disbelief. The deductions described damage that simply didn't exist when I moved out. The walls had minor scuff marks that would require touch-up painting at most, not full repainting. The carpets showed normal wear and were professionally cleaned before I left. The kitchen and bathroom were spotless and required no special cleaning beyond what any responsible tenant would do. I immediately called Margaret to discuss the deductions. "Margaret, I don't understand these charges," I said. "The apartment was in excellent condition when I left. I had to do significant work to get it ready for the next tenant," Margaret replied. "The walls needed complete repainting, and the carpets were too worn to be acceptable." "The walls had minor scuff marks that could be touched up," I protested. "And the carpets were clean with normal traffic wear." "The wear was excessive," Margaret insisted. "I had to replace the entire carpet." "Margaret, I have photos from move-out day showing the actual condition of the apartment," I said. "The deductions you're claiming don't match the reality of what I left." "Well, you might not have noticed all the damage," Margaret replied dismissively. "I have higher standards for my properties than most tenants realize." The conversation made it clear that Margaret was not willing to reduce the deductions or acknowledge that her claims were exaggerated. Over the next week, I researched tenant rights and security deposit law in our state. I learned that landlords can only deduct for damages beyond normal wear and tear, and that they must provide receipts and documentation for any work performed. I also discovered that tenants have the right to inspect repair work and receive copies of invoices for any deductions claimed. I sent Margaret a formal letter requesting receipts and documentation for all the work she claimed to have performed, as required by state law. Margaret's response was telling. "I don't need to provide receipts. The damage was obvious, and the deductions are reasonable." Her refusal to provide documentation suggested that either the work hadn't been performed as claimed, or the costs were inflated beyond what was actually necessary. I decided to drive by my former apartment to see if I could observe any of the renovation work Margaret claimed was necessary. What I found was shocking. The apartment was undergoing extensive renovations that went far beyond addressing any damage I might have caused. Workers were installing new hardwood floors to replace the carpet, completely remodeling the kitchen with new cabinets and countertops, and updating the bathroom with new fixtures and tile work. These weren't repairs to address tenant damage, they were major improvements to upgrade the apartment and justify higher rent for future tenants. I realized that Margaret was using my security deposit to fund renovations she wanted to make anyway, regardless of the apartment's actual condition when I moved out. I took photos of the renovation work and contacted the tenant rights organization in our city for advice about how to proceed. "This sounds like a clear case of security deposit abuse," the tenant advocate told me. "Landlords cannot use deposits to fund improvements or renovations that increase the value of their property." "What are my options?" I asked. "You can file a complaint with the city's housing authority and potentially sue for the return of your deposit plus damages," she explained. "If the landlord violated security deposit law, you might be entitled to double or triple damages plus attorney fees." Armed with this information, I filed a formal complaint with the City Housing Authority and began preparing for small claims court action. The Housing Authority assigned Inspector James Chen to investigate my complaint. Inspector Chen scheduled a visit to examine the apartment and interview both Margaret and me about the disputed charges. During the inspection, Inspector Chen reviewed my move-out photos, examined Margaret's deduction list, and assessed the renovation work being performed. Miss Martinez, can you show me the wall damage that required $800 in repainting? Inspector Chen asked Margaret. Well, the walls needed to be freshened up for the new tenant, Margaret replied vaguely. That's not the same as damage caused by the tenant, Inspector Chen pointed out. Normal wall scuffs and nail holes don't justify full repainting charges. Inspector Chen continued reviewing each claimed deduction with the same level of scrutiny. The carpet replacement you're charging, $600 for, appears to be an upgrade to hardwood flooring, he observed. That's an improvement, not a repair of tenant damage. The carpet was worn, Margaret insisted. Normal carpet wear over a year-long tenancy doesn't justify replacement costs, Inspector Chen replied. That would be considered normal wear and tear. After completing his investigation, Inspector Chen issued a formal finding that Margaret had violated state security deposit law by claiming deductions for normal wear and tear and property improvements. Landlords cannot charge tenants for renovations that increase property value or address normal wear and tear, Inspector Chen's report stated. The deductions claimed appear to be for improvements the landlord wanted to make rather than damages caused by the tenant. The report recommended that Margaret return my full security deposit immediately and warned that failure to comply could result in additional penalties. But Margaret refused to comply with the Housing Authority's recommendation. I stand by my deductions, she told Inspector Chen. The tenant caused damage that required repair. Her continued refusal to return my deposit forced me to file a lawsuit in small claims court. In preparing for court, I gathered comprehensive documentation. Photos of the apartment's excellent condition at move-out. Evidence of the renovations Margaret was performing. Inspector Chen's report finding violations of security deposit law. Testimony from neighbors who could verify the apartment's condition. I also researched similar cases and discovered that our state's security deposit law includes penalties for landlords who wrongfully retain deposits. Under state law, tenants who successfully prove wrongful retention of security deposits are entitled to receive double or triple the amount wrongfully withheld, plus attorney fees and court costs. The court hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after I filed the complaint. Margaret appeared with a folder of papers, presumably hoping to justify her deductions. Your Honor, I began during my presentation. My landlord is claiming 2-0 in damages for normal wear and tear and property improvements she wanted to make, regardless of the apartment's condition. I presented my evidence systematically. Photos showing the apartment's excellent move-out condition. Documentation of Margaret's extensive renovations. Inspector Chen's report confirming violations of housing law. Proof that Margaret refused to provide receipts as required by law. Your Honor, Margaret responded when given her chance to present. The tenant caused damage that required significant repair work. Do you have receipts for the repair work you claim to have performed? The judge asked. The damage was obvious, Margaret replied, avoiding the question. Miss Walsh, state law requires landlords to provide documentation for security deposit deductions, the judge explained. Do you have invoices for the specific repairs you charged the tenant for? Margaret shuffled through her papers but could not produce receipts for the work she had claimed. Furthermore, the judge continued after reviewing my photos. The evidence suggests that you performed major renovations that appear to be improvements rather than repairs of tenant damage. The judge spent several minutes reviewing Inspector Chen's report and my photographic evidence. Miss Walsh, the Housing Authority has already determined that your security deposit deductions violated state law, the judge said. You charged the tenant for normal wear and tear and property improvements, both of which are prohibited. The tenant should have taken better care of the apartment, Margaret argued weakly. The evidence shows the tenant took excellent care of the apartment and left it in substantially the same condition as when the tenancy began, accounting for normal wear, the judge replied. After reviewing all the evidence, the judge issued his ruling. I find that the landlord wrongfully retained the tenant's security deposit in violation of state housing law. The claimed damages were either normal wear and tear or property improvements that cannot be charged to tenants. Furthermore, the judge continued, the landlord's refusal to provide required documentation and continued insistence on retaining the deposit despite clear evidence of wrongdoing demonstrates bad faith. The judge ordered Margaret to pay me 2.0 for the return of my wrongfully withheld security deposit, 4.0 in treble damages as provided by state law for willful violations, 500 in court costs and filing fees. Total award, 6.500. Miss Walsh, the judge concluded, security deposit law exists to protect tenants from exactly the kind of abuse demonstrated in this case. Landlords cannot use tenant deposits to fund renovations or improvements, regardless of their desire to upgrade their properties. Margaret's attempt to steal my 2.0 deposit had resulted in a court judgment requiring her to pay me 6.500. After the hearing, Margaret approached me with an offer to settle for less than the full judgment. I can pay you 3.0 to resolve this matter, she suggested. The court ordered you to pay 6.500, I replied. That's what I expect to receive. I think the judgment was excessive, Margaret protested. You thought you could steal my deposit to pay for renovations you wanted, I replied. The court disagreed. Margaret ultimately paid the full judgment amount, plus additional interest that had accumulated during the time she delayed payment. 6 months later, I learned that Margaret had been investigated by the Housing Authority for similar violations involving other tenants. My case had prompted a broader investigation into her rental practices, resulting in additional penalties and required policy changes. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that detailed documentation is essential when dealing with landlords who might try to abuse the security deposit process. The photos I took at move-out, combined with knowledge of my legal rights, made it impossible for Margaret to justify her fraudulent deductions. I also learned that housing law provides strong protections for tenants, including significant financial penalties for landlords who violate security deposit regulations. The woman whose landlord said she left the apartment damaged learned that housing inspectors can distinguish between tenant damage and landlord improvements, and that wrongful retention of security deposits carries penalties that far exceed the original deposit amount. And the landlord who thought she could fund her renovations with tenant deposits learned that housing law violations can result in triple damages plus court costs, making theft much more expensive than honest business practices. Today, I rent from a different landlord who follows proper procedures and treats security deposits as the legal trust funds they are meant to be. Margaret learned that stealing deposits to fund property improvements is not a viable business strategy when tenants know their rights and are willing to enforce them through legal action. Sometimes the most expensive lesson landlords can learn is that tenant deposits are not slush funds for property improvements, and that housing law carries real consequences for those who violate it. Have you ever had a landlord wrongfully keep your security deposit? How do you document apartment condition to protect yourself from fraudulent charges? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about tenant rights, fighting housing fraud, and learning that detailed documentation can turn the tables on dishonest landlords.